So here we are in Pleasant Grove, Utah. This is not a real post office. They put a couple of mailboxes on the sidewalk, and but those were just props. But in fact, we did get a couple of people drop real letters into those prop mailboxes. So I think the art department crew, when they discovered that, they probably took them to a real post office. But we just kind of set that one up. Okay, this may be part of the springtime shoot because you can see snow on the mountains way in the deep background, and the leaves don't look like they're fully formed on the trees there. Maybe they're just barely coming out, and so, well, that's interesting. This house, by the way, is still there. There's kind of a vacant lot to the side of the house where, in this episode, they've parked the Airstream trailer. And today, years after this was shot, there are a couple houses, new houses that have been built in the lot next to this house. The house itself, I actually just saw it a couple of months ago, and it's been repainted. It's all white. It looks like it's just kind of completely vacant inside. The curtains have been removed. You can look through the windows, and it looks like nobody's been there for a long, long time, which is sad. It's just a very nice house. We always enjoyed going there. It's just a nice, pleasant, clean house that just really fit that character, Erasmus. Again, this is in Pleasant Grove, just across the street from that place that we dressed up to look like a post office, even though it wasn't a post office. All right, so here we are back at the church, and you can see blossoms on the trees there. So that, again, is an indication that this was part of the original pilot shoot, again, shot at night. And if they'd had to do this during the summertime, they wouldn't have been able to start this scene until probably 10:30, 11 o'clock at night when the sky was dark enough. And a scene like this, very emotional, some interesting camera moves, and just, getting a scene like this right takes time, and they would have spent quite a bit of time, at least a couple of hours, doing a scene like this one. Just a word about the director who directed both versions of this pilot episode. That's Michael Schultz is his name, and he's a veteran of many years' experience on lots of different television shows. Many years ago, lots of feature films in Hollywood. Back in the 70s, he did a movie called Greased Lightning with Richard Pryor. Michael Schultz, the director of an old movie called Car Wash, which was a pop culture phenomenon movie of the 1970s. Even there was a movie called Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band starring the Bee Gees, directed by Michael Schultz back in the 70s. Well, at this point in the 1990s, he was doing Touched by an Angel and some other things, and he came and directed some episodes of Promised Land throughout the run of the series. After Promised Land was over, Michael Schultz continued to direct television shows, and one of them was Everwood, which was also shot in and around the Salt Lake City area. And a lot of the crew members who had been on the Promised Land show also worked on the show Everwood later. So this is kind of fun to have that kind of continuity. In case you're wondering, when they have directors who work on these TV shows, they will often, for example, with Touched by an Angel, Promised Land, a director would do one episode, and then another director does the next episode, and then maybe the first director would come back after that. Rarely would you have a director do two episodes in a row. They would often alternate, or maybe a director would only do, 2 or 3 episodes per season of a show like Promised Land or Touched by an Angel. And some of our directors would then go, direct other shows that were being made at the time, stuff like Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, or Seventh Heaven, or some of that. We had directors that would go work on all those other things as well.
Daddy, can we talk to you?
Sure.
Mama, too.
Okay, once again, this appears to be part of the original version of the pilot episode. People are wearing jackets, and but that's not there, because Hattie and Nathaniel were in that. Okay, so here you see they have, it's the side of Erasmus's house. There's a garage there. There's a little gazebo. There's, kind of some wooden decking material all over there. And that's the stuff that was really there outside the house. I'm not sure how much of it had kind of been enhanced by the art department and how much of it was actually just already at the house before any of this movie stuff showed up. But I just want you to keep in mind what all that stuff looks like, because later there's a night scene, and I'll have something to say about how that was shot. Again, this same spot in the story, but I'll talk about that later. We had, as far as in the background, you might have seen the Airstream trailer and the Chevy Suburban that were used in the show. We had two versions of that Chevy Suburban to use in the show. They'd been dressed up to look any minor differences that they might have had. They were made to match each other. The guys actually painted a little bit of what looked like rust around the fenders on those Chevy Suburbans. So we had two of them, just because sometimes we needed both of them. Sometimes we'd be shooting scenes inside the Suburban, and at the same time we wanted scenes of the Suburban driving past, so it sped things up if we could use one for the interiors and have it maybe be towed around with actors inside and lights hanging out the sides and stuff like that, and another that we could just drive around, get more work done that way. Another thing that we had at the beginning, we had a smaller version of the Airstream trailer, so that if you were, for example, you had the camera in front of the Suburban looking in through the windshield at the people inside, you didn't necessarily have to tow the full-size Airstream trailer behind that to see that through the back window of the Suburban. We had a smaller one that you could see through the back window. Eventually, we didn't really use that trick very much, but there turned out to be a lot of scenes throughout the course of the series that were actors sitting in the Airstream trailer talking, dialogue playing out, that sort of thing. And a lot of times, because the premise of the show was the family traveling together, we had all 6 of our main character, all those actors, in that Suburban at the same time, playing out the various scenes we were shooting. Incidentally, when this episode was being reshot, they did have near the set a VCR, basically, and videotape, so they could look at the original version of the pilot episode if they needed to match any of the action or anything to what had been shot before. So that was available, but they didn't refer to it very often. I saw a few bits and pieces of it, but I myself have not seen the complete original version of the pilot episode, which was then redone. Okay, here we are back in Pleasant Grove, and this is not a real Greyhound bus station. There's no bus station near here at all, but we brought in the bus, and we happened to just use this little piece of street in Pleasant Grove as though this is where the bus comes and goes from Chicory Creek. I happened to notice at the very beginning of the episode, and let me take you back, since I can do this through the magic of editing. There's a shot where Tess and Monica, the characters played by Della Reese and Roma Downey, are riding around in the Cadillac that was a part of the show. And you can see deep in the background, there's a Greyhound bus back there making a turn. I think it's this same bus. Or one just like it that we used to shoot interiors, and just happened to be the timing of, when that bus was coming to show up so we could use it. It just happened to be way back there in the deep background. What do you know? Again, when they shot the original version of this, Roma Downey was still with child. She had not given birth yet. I believe this is a double for Roma Downey. With that hat on, and he sits next to her and, look out the window and what have you. But now what you're going to see is a little bit from the original version of the show. And you can just kind of see from the way she's holding her arms, it looks like maybe she was still with child at that point. Interesting how all these things come together so seamlessly, however.
I got 2 sandwiches here. Can I offer you one of them?
Now, when they shot scenes inside this bus, they used a real bus. However, the bus wasn't actually traveling when they shot this. They put the bus inside kind of a warehouse that was near Springville and darkened the room around it. And then they did superimpose a few things outside the window later to make it look like the bus was moving through the countryside. This is actually downtown Salt Lake City. There are places where you can make it look crowded, make it look like New York City if you need to. This is supposed to be New York City, but it's actually Salt Lake City. And boy, it's hard to remember whether or not this was part of the original version that was shot in the spring, which was shot when I wasn't there. See, I've seen this episode so many times and worked with these actors several times since this was shot that now I can't remember exactly if I was there when they shot this scene, but I'm pretty sure, I'm going to give it a 90% chance that what you're watching right now, is part of the original version of the pilot episode, which was not reshot to make the final version of the pilot episode. So there you go. No reason to reshoot this. This is kind of, part of establishing the theme of what Promised Land, the series, is all about. So I think they pretty much got this one right the first time. And since the actors were not recast and there was no other reason to want to reshoot it, then they didn't have to reshoot it. They used this one as is. Just some more technical trivia. The show was shot on 16 millimeter film. Now, 16 millimeter at that point was kind of, not most shows that were the 1 hour drama style show were being shot on film, but not 16 millimeter film. They were using 35 millimeter film. So I think part of the reason we were shot on 16 millimeter film was just that it did reduce the cost of production. And at that time, standard definition television 16 millimeter was adequate for the task. But part of the reason they were shooting in Utah anyway was reduced cost compared to shooting in Los Angeles or some other place like that. So 16 millimeter was part of the deal. Now, eventually, midway through this first season of Promised Land, they changed to a format called Super 16. Super 16 is still 16 millimeter film, which doesn't have quite the resolution and some of the other higher quality characteristics of 35 millimeter film. But Super 16 takes off one side of the frame that would normally have perforations or what you might call sprocket holes. By the way, this is not a real elevator. That was a fake one. Anyway, Super 16 takes away one side of the film would have sprocket holes and actually uses that extra space to expose more picture information. So Super 16 gives you the wider frame. It was kind of a transition towards high definition television, but at the time we were still using, still doing standard definition television for the run of the Promised Land show. Okay, this is part of the reshoot, and again, this bus is in a warehouse, and any movement you see outside the window was placed there as a special effect after the fact. But when we were shooting it, it was just a bus inside a big dark room, and what you saw out the window was just black. So again, we're inside a real bus. They've managed to cram enough lighting and camera equipment into the aisle there, or maybe an adjacent seat. But you can see it's kind of a cramped space. A very powerful scene. I gotta say, obviously I'm not involved with the writing of the show, and nobody's gonna give me a lot of information before I'm there on the set, ready to help with producing the show. So I was quite moved watching them perform this scene, both in the rehearsals and actually when they shot it. It's a moving scene. It's again one of the key points of the episode. I don't know why they reshot this. I suppose just tweaking the script, or I don't know if originally Roma Downey was doing the angel stuff here. I just don't know. I never saw that, but whatever they did it right, because it choked me up watching it, and you get kind of embarrassed when you're on the crew and you're just trying to do a job and you're getting into the story and getting choked up by it. But of course, Della Reese, a joy to work with. She's very just brings a certain energy with her whenever she comes to the set, and it's a little bit infectious, and just a very sweet person. So and the sincerity with which she performs. I mean, this is the kind of person she is. When you see her performing, and the way she talks, the way she behaves, that's Della Reese. So some other trivia. When we were shooting this episode, the reshoot, we were a little bit pressed for time because we needed to get into production of the series itself. So we actually shot on a Saturday to kind of speed up the schedule as we went here. Normally, though, we wouldn't have shot Saturdays. Normally, for Promised Land, Touched by an Angel, we would shoot Monday through Friday, and we would shoot about 8 days to produce one episode of the show. So, average that out, it would take 3 weeks or so to do 2 episodes. And so we'd have to start in, say, the middle of July, usually, to get enough episodes in the can so that when the series, or when a certain season of the series premieres in say, mid-September or late September, then we can run, say, 10 episodes in a row up through, say, Thanksgiving before we start running into reruns of the show. But yeah, it took about, many shows that are done in Hollywood, they do maybe 7 days of shooting for a 1-hour episode. We did 8.